The courtroom was filled with the usual buzz of anticipation. The audience whispered among themselves, curious about the next case that would unfold before Judge Judy. The bailiff stood tall, his voice echoing across the room as he called the case number. Slowly, an elderly man entered, moving with the kind of grace and quiet strength that comes only with age and experience. He was wearing a simple, clean suit, slightly loose at the shoulders, and his sleeves were rolled down to his wrists despite the warmth of the lights overhead. His hair was silver gray, his face lined with years of living, yet his eyes held the calm confidence of someone who had seen far worse than a courtroom. Judge Judy looked up from her papers, glancing at the man before her. "Mr. Roberts," she said, reading his name from the file, "you're 82 years old, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," he replied in a deep, steady voice. His tone was respectful but carried a quiet authority that made even the murmuring audience fall silent. The case seemed simple enough on paper. Mr. Roberts was suing a local auto repair shop for overcharging him and damaging his vehicle during what should have been a routine repair. But from the moment he began speaking, it became clear there was more to this story than what was written in the complaint. Judge Judy, known for her sharpness and impatience, leaned forward as the old man began to explain what had happened. "I brought my truck in to have the transmission checked," he said. "It's an old Chevy. I've had it for over 20 years. They said they'd fix it in 3 days, but when I got it back, it barely ran. They told me it was my fault and refused to refund me." The defendant, a man in his 30s wearing a mechanic's uniform, crossed his arms and rolled his eyes. "Your Honor, we did the job as requested. The truck was falling apart when he brought it in. We can't be held responsible for something that old breaking down." Judge Judy held up a hand. "Don't interrupt him while he's speaking," she said sharply. Then she turned back to Mr. Roberts. "Continue." The veteran nodded slowly. "I tried to talk to them politely, ma'am. I didn't want trouble. But they laughed at me and told me I was just an old man who didn't understand cars anymore. That's when I decided to come here." There was a pause, the kind of silence that filled the room whenever Judge Judy weighed her next question. "You said you were a veteran, correct?" she asked, noticing the small pin on his lapel, a faded gold insignia of the U.S. Army. "Yes, Your Honor," he said, his voice softer now. "I served in Korea and Vietnam." A low murmur went through the audience. Even Judge Judy's stern expression softened for a moment. "And you're here today because you believe you were taken advantage of," she said. "That's right," he answered. "I've spent my life standing up for what's right, for people who couldn't defend themselves. I may be old, but I know when something's unfair." The mechanic smirked under his breath. "With all due respect, Your Honor, this guy's exaggerating. We fixed the car. He's just trying to get free work out of us." Judge Judy's eyes narrowed. "Do you have the receipt for the repairs?" she asked. The mechanic nodded and handed it to the bailiff. She examined it carefully, frowning. "So you charged him $1,200 for a transmission flush and seal replacement?" "That's standard," the mechanic said defensively. "Not for a truck from 1989 it isn't," Judge Judy snapped. "You could buy the whole vehicle for that." The audience chuckled lightly, but Mr. Roberts remained calm, his hands resting on the table. There was something about him, a kind of quiet patience that made even Judge Judy's usual sharp tone seem to soften slightly as the exchange continued. After some back and forth over the details of the repair, Judge Judy turned back to Mr. Roberts. "Mr. Roberts, I notice you've kept your sleeves down this entire time," she said, her sharp eyes catching everything. "Are you cold?" He smiled faintly, shaking his head. "No, ma'am. It's just habit." Judge Judy raised an eyebrow. "Habit?" The old man hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I've worn long sleeves for as long as I can remember. Even in summer." The mechanic laughed quietly. "Maybe he's hiding the oil stains from working on that junker of a truck." The courtroom's mood shifted instantly. The audience gasped softly, sensing the disrespect in his tone. Judge Judy's eyes flashed. "Watch your mouth," she warned sharply. You're in my courtroom, not a garage. Mr. Roberts didn't flinch. Instead, he slowly rolled back his sleeves. The room grew still. Beneath the fabric were deep, faded scars that ran along both arms, marks that looked old but unmistakably severe. These, he said quietly, aren't from fixing cars. Even Judge Judy looked momentarily speechless. The entire courtroom stared, a hush falling over the room. The scars were not random, they were the kind seen on soldiers who had suffered burns or shrapnel wounds. Mr. Roberts continued, his voice low but steady. I was injured in Vietnam, during an ambush in 1968. Our convoy was hit by mortar fire. I pulled 2 of my men out before the second blast went off. They didn't make it, but I did. The mechanic's smirk vanished. His eyes dropped to the floor. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, her tone now far gentler. Mr. Roberts, you didn't need to show that, she said. I know, he replied softly. But I wanted to. Because that's the reason I'm here. I didn't come for the money, ma'am. It's about respect. I fought my whole life believing that people should be honest, that a man's word should mean something. When that mechanic looked me in the eye and lied to me, it wasn't just about a car anymore. It was about principle. The audience was silent, some visibly emotional. Even the normally unflinching Judge Judy seemed moved. She adjusted her glasses, studying him for a moment. You're right, Mr. Roberts. It is about principle. Part 1 ends here with the tension and emotion high, the moment just after he reveals his scars and before the judgment begins to unfold. The silence in the courtroom lingered for several moments after Mr. Roberts rolled his sleeves back down. The air was heavy, not with tension, but with respect. Even Judge Judy, known for her brisk impatience and razor-sharp tongue, took a deep breath before speaking again. Her usual authority was still there, but her voice carried an uncharacteristic softness. Mr. Roberts, she said, I want to make one thing clear. Your service and sacrifice speak for themselves. But this case is about fairness and truth. And from what I'm hearing so far, you've been treated unfairly. The mechanic shifted uncomfortably at the defendant's table. His earlier arrogance had evaporated, replaced by the kind of unease that comes when someone realizes they've misjudged the person sitting across from them. Judge Judy turned her sharp gaze toward him. Mr. Lane, she said firmly, you claimed the truck was already in poor condition before the repairs. Correct? Yes, Your Honor, he said quickly, trying to regain his composure. The vehicle was very old, it had several pre-existing issues. I explained to him that fixing one part wouldn't guarantee the rest of the car would hold up. Judge Judy nodded slightly, flipping through the paperwork in front of her. And yet, she said, holding up a photo, this invoice shows that you charged him for a new transmission gasket, a flush, new fluid, and a filter. That's fine, but then you also added $200 for a service inspection that wasn't authorized. Why? The mechanic hesitated. That's a standard fee, Your Honor. No, she replied sharply, it's not. Not unless the customer agrees to it. That's called an unauthorized charge. The audience murmured. Mr. Lane swallowed hard, glancing toward Mr. Roberts, who remained calm and steady, his hands folded neatly on the table. Judge Judy continued, you also claimed the vehicle suffered further internal damage after leaving your shop. Do you have proof that the problem wasn't caused by your work? Mr. Lane rubbed the back of his neck. Well, we didn't take pictures or anything, but... Then you don't have proof, Judge Judy interrupted. You don't get to make claims in my courtroom without evidence. She leaned forward, her expression hardening. What I see here is a man who brought in his vehicle, trusted your business to treat him fairly, and instead got overcharged and disrespected. That's not just bad business, that's dishonorable. The mechanic opened his mouth as if to argue, but no words came out. The courtroom was too still. Even he knew there was no excuse that would make him look better now. Mr. Roberts spoke up quietly. Your Honor, I didn't come here looking for pity. I've had harder days than this, believe me. But when someone tells you one thing and does another, it's hard to let that go. I don't expect special treatment because of my past, I just want honesty. Judge Judy nodded slowly. And you deserve it. She turned back to the defendant. You know, Mr. Lane, when I first started as a judge, I saw cases like this all the time. Younger people thinking they can take advantage of someone older, assuming they won't fight back. But I've learned something. The people who've lived through the hardest times are often the toughest to deceive. The courtroom erupted in quiet applause, though Judge Judy quickly motioned for silence. She wasn't done. Mr. Roberts, she said, I want to ask, when you found out the car wasn't working, what did the shop tell you? He looked down for a moment, recalling the memory. They told me it was probably something I did. That I didn't know how to maintain a truck. When I asked to see the manager, they laughed. One of them even said I should go home and let my grandson drive instead. That's when I decided to take it to another mechanic for an inspection. He reached into his pocket and handed a piece of paper to the bailiff. This is the report from that inspection. They said the transmission was installed incorrectly. The fluid lines weren't sealed right. Judge Judy read through the document carefully, then looked back up. So, according to this report, the repairs from Mr. Lane's shop caused additional damage, which means you're responsible, she said, pointing at the defendant. And that's not my opinion, that's fact. The audience murmured again. Mr. Lane's face turned red. I didn't know about that, Your Honor, he stammered. Oh, you knew, Judge Judy shot back. You just didn't think this gentleman would do anything about it. You saw an older man, figured he'd pay and walk away. But you didn't count on him having the integrity and courage that he clearly carries with him every day. Her voice rose slightly, the conviction in it echoing across the room. That kind of disrespect doesn't just break business ethics, it breaks decency. And in my courtroom, that doesn't fly. Mr. Roberts simply nodded, his expression calm, though his eyes glistened faintly. The years of quiet resilience, of dignity carried through hardship, were visible in every small movement. Judge Judy leaned back, tapping her pen on the desk. Mr. Roberts, the amount you're claiming is $1,200 for the repair cost plus an additional $600 for the damage correction from the second mechanic. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. And you have documentation for the second repair? Yes, ma'am. Good. She looked back at the defendant. Mr. Lane, I find your business practices deceptive. You took advantage of a man who trusted you, failed to perform the service correctly, and then tried to place the blame on him. That's unacceptable. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Judgment for the plaintiff, full amount plus filing fees. The audience clapped, unable to contain themselves this time. Mr. Roberts gave a small, humble nod, though he didn't smile. His manner remained modest, the same quiet dignity he'd carried since walking into the courtroom. As Judge Judy gathered her papers, she looked back at him one last time. Mr. Roberts, I hope you know that your story won't be forgotten here today. You reminded everyone in this room, including me, that respect is earned, not demanded. And that integrity doesn't age. The old veteran bowed his head slightly. Thank you, Your Honor. That means a lot. Before she could dismiss the case, something unexpected happened. The bailiff, who had stood silently throughout, stepped forward. Your Honor, if I may, he said respectfully. I just want to say, I served in Iraq. And I want to thank this man for what he did before my time. Men like him made it possible for me to come home. Mr. Roberts looked up, surprised. The two men exchanged a nod, a simple gesture between soldiers that spoke volumes. The audience grew emotional once again. Judge Judy cleared her throat. Well, she said softly, I think that's the best note to end on. The case was officially over, but the story didn't end there. As Mr. Roberts left the courtroom, several audience members approached him quietly, shaking his hand, thanking him for his service. Even the cameraman, who had filmed hundreds of episodes, seemed unusually still, his lens following the veteran's slow, steady walk out the door. The defendant, Mr. Lane, remained seated, staring at the floor. When the camera stopped rolling, he turned to the bailiff. "I didn't know," he said under his breath. "I swear, I didn't know what he'd been through." The bailiff gave him a stern look. "That's the problem, man. You shouldn't need to know someone's story to treat them with respect." Outside, the sun was bright, the air crisp. Mr. Roberts stood for a moment on the steps, breathing it in. His truck, now fully repaired by the honest mechanic, was waiting nearby. He placed his hat on his head, the same worn cap with his old unit's insignia, and smiled faintly. A reporter from the show approached him, microphone in hand. "Mr. Roberts, how do you feel about today's decision?" He looked thoughtful for a moment before answering. "Justice was done. But more than that, I think people saw something they needed to see. We live in a world where folks forget that respect costs nothing. You don't have to earn it with medals or titles. You give it because it's right." The reporter nodded. "You really made an impact in there today." He chuckled softly. "I didn't do anything special. I just told the truth. The truth has a way of standing on its own." As he turned to walk toward his truck, the camera caught one last glimpse of his hand brushing the hood, a gesture that seemed almost symbolic. The scars on his arm caught the sunlight for a brief second before disappearing beneath his sleeve again. Inside the courtroom, Judge Judy was still sitting at her bench, looking unusually reflective. She turned to the bailiff. "You know," she said quietly, "I've been doing this a long time, but every so often, someone walks in who reminds you why you started." The bailiff nodded. "He's one of those people, ma'am." She gave a small smile. "Yes. He is." And as the studio lights dimmed, the audience slowly left the room, still whispering about the old veteran who had stunned everyone, not with anger, not with accusations, but with dignity, honesty, and the kind of strength that never fades. That day, the viewers at home saw more than a courtroom dispute. They saw a lesson, one that echoed far beyond Judge Judy's bench. You never truly know the battles someone has fought until they roll up their sleeves. Within days, it had millions of views. The comments section was filled with gratitude, admiration, and emotion. This man didn't just win a case, he taught a lesson. Respect isn't about age, it's about integrity. Judge Judy looked genuinely moved. That says everything. Across social media, veterans groups began sharing the clip too, calling Mr. Roberts an example of humility and courage. News outlets picked up the story, and soon, local reporters were knocking on his door, hoping to learn more about the quiet man who had reminded the world what respect really means. Mr. Roberts lived alone in a modest house on the outskirts of town. His home was small but well-kept, filled with photos, some of his late wife, some of his children and grandchildren, and a few of his platoon from decades ago. When a young journalist came to interview him, she was surprised by how humble he was. "I didn't expect any of this," he said with a small smile, pouring her a cup of coffee. "I went to court to stand up for myself, that's all. I didn't think people would care this much." "They care because of what you said, and what you showed," she told him gently. "When you rolled up your sleeves, it felt like the whole world stopped for a moment." He chuckled quietly. "I didn't plan that. I just wanted to be honest. I didn't want anyone to think I was trying to use my past to get sympathy. I've lived long enough to know that the truth, plain and simple, is enough." As they talked, the journalist noticed that he spoke about the war not with bitterness, but with perspective. "Those scars," he said softly, looking down at his arms, "they're reminders. Not of pain, but of the fact that I made it through. And every day since then, I've tried to live in a way that honors the ones who didn't." Meanwhile, something unexpected was happening across town. At the small auto shop where the case began, business had plummeted. Customers had seen the Judge Judy episode, and word spread quickly that the owner, Mr. Lane, had disrespected a war veteran. Reviews flooded in online, calling out the shop's treatment of him. Within a week, they had to put up a sign that read, "Under new management." But the truth was, Mr. Lane hadn't sold the business. He was still there, just quieter. The public backlash had shaken him deeply. He'd lost more than customers, he'd lost his sense of pride. One evening, after closing, he sat in the small office at the back of the shop, watching the viral video of the trial again. He watched the moment when Mr. Roberts rolled up his sleeves, the gasp from the audience, the stillness that followed. He paused it there. He stared at the scars on the screen, then at his own hands, stained with grease but unscarred. For the first time, he felt the weight of what he'd done. A few days later, he drove to the address listed on the court documents, Mr. Roberts's home. When he arrived, he hesitated before knocking on the door. The veteran answered, looking surprised but calm. "Mr. Lane," he said, his voice steady. "Didn't expect to see you here." I wanted to apologize," the younger man said. His tone was genuine, stripped of the arrogance he'd once carried. "I watched the episode again. I realized how wrong I was. I treated you like you didn't matter. And I've been thinking about it ever since." Mr. Roberts studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "It takes a lot to come here and say that," he said quietly. "Sit down." The two men sat on the porch, the evening light casting long shadows across the yard. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, Mr. Lane said, "When I was a kid, my dad served in Desert Storm. He came back angry and quiet. I never understood him. When you told your story in court, I saw something in your eyes, the same look my dad had. I think I finally get it now." Mr. Roberts listened patiently. "War changes people," he said softly. "It doesn't always make sense to those who haven't been there. But it's not about what we lose, it's about how we live after. Your father probably carried more than he could ever say." Mr. Lane nodded, his voice breaking slightly. "I wish I'd treated him better. I wish I treated you better." Mr. Roberts smiled faintly. "You're making it right now." They shook hands, a firm, quiet handshake between two men from different generations who finally understood one another. After that day, Mr. Lane began volunteering with a local veterans repair program, fixing vehicles for retired soldiers free of charge. It started as a small act of atonement, but soon it became something more. The community noticed. Word spread that the mechanic who once disrespected a veteran was now repairing their cars and trucks without asking for a dime. Slowly, his reputation began to rebuild, not through excuses, but through action. As for Mr. Roberts, he became something of a local hero, though he never saw himself that way. Schools invited him to speak to students, community centers asked him to share his story, and every time he did, he gave the same message. Respect isn't earned by medals or money. It's earned by the way you treat people. Every person you meet is fighting a battle you can't see. So before you judge, before you mock, before you cheat, remember that. One evening, a small ceremony was held in his honor at the local Veterans Hall. The mayor, the bailiff from Judge Judy, and even Judge Judy herself sent a letter that was read aloud. In it, she wrote, "Mr. Roberts reminded all of us, inside and outside the courtroom, that integrity never grows old. It's the backbone of justice, and the reason the truth still matters." When the applause died down, Mr. Roberts stepped up to the microphone. "I don't deserve all this," he said with a shy smile. "I just told my story. But if that story helped someone remember to be kind or honest, then that's enough for me." The audience stood, clapping as he slowly walked off stage. He felt humbled, not by fame, but by gratitude, the kind that comes from knowing his small act of courage had sparked something much bigger. Months later, he received a letter in the mail. It was from Mr. Lane. Inside was a short note and a photograph. In the picture, the mechanic stood with a group of veterans next to a row of freshly repaired trucks. The note read, "Thank you for showing me what real honor looks like. I'm trying to live up to it." Mr. Roberts smiled as he set the letter down. Outside, the sun dipped low, painting the sky in soft shades of gold. He walked out to his porch, sat in his old wooden chair, and looked at the fading light. His sleeves were rolled up again, and for the first time in a long while, he felt the breeze on his arms without thinking about the scars. They were no longer reminders of pain, they were symbols of endurance, honesty, and hope. He whispered quietly to himself, "You see, boys, we made it after all," as if speaking to the friends he'd lost long ago. In the distance, a car horn sounded, a neighbor waving as they drove past. Mr. Roberts waved back, smiling. The world felt peaceful again. And somewhere far away, on a rerun channel, the Judge Judy episode played once more. The audience gasped as the old veteran rolled up his sleeves, revealing his story to the world without a single word of anger, just truth. It wasn't just a courtroom moment anymore. It had become a message, a reminder that kindness, courage, and integrity never go out of style. Because sometimes, the strongest thing a person can do isn't to fight, it's to stand tall, speak honestly, and let their scars tell the story. That day, and in every replay that followed, the world remembered him not as just an old veteran, but as a man who taught everyone watching that real strength doesn't hide, it's just waiting to be revealed.